Kaya Turski, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, DJ. It's great to be here.
What's important for me and my listeners to know to best understand you?
Wow, that's a very open and kind of a deep question to start with, but I love it. Let's dig in. I come from a background of freestyle skiing. Actually, I started off as a rollerblader, freestyle, aggressive inline rollerblading, very niche sport, but the first love of my life. And that's where I built my foundation in freestyle. So air awareness, balance, transitions, all that stuff. I transferred that over to freestyle skiing in my later teens, like 16, 17, and went on the world tour for over 10 years, X Games, World Champs, World Cups, that whole tour, and had a blast. Those freestyle environments, high risk, high intensity, fast pace, that's really where I thrived, where I have the most fun, especially when you throw in some creativity in there. That's one of the things I love most about freestyle sports. And I've been retired for about 7 years now. I've got a much calmer, softer, artistic side as well. So that's what I'm kind of leaning into now, working with really brilliant sports psychologist and his team of Finding Mastery. Love, love, love the psychological aspect behind performance in sport and beyond. So, whatever you want to bring your A game to, that interests me. Who you are and how you do that. So that's what I'm doing right now, and that's a place from where I've come.
All right. Why don't you take us back? I'd love to hear the story. You're 18 years old. It's your first kind of attempt here as a pro. Walk me through and my listeners through what was that like? Bring us back to that moment of when you're in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I had very, very rocky start to my career. It's funny because on the outside, everything always looks so glamorous. You look at the list of accomplishments and it's like, wow, stellar career. And in the midst of that were really a lot of injuries, like I mentioned, and it started off with one of the toughest injuries I've ever been through. I was 18 years old. I had just signed my first professional contract with Solomon Skis. I was riding high. I was, the young athlete to watch, the new girl on the scene. And I went to San Francisco where they built a big air, which is a singular jump that it's a big air. And you do a trick over the jump. Sometimes it's on a hill, on natural snow, and then sometimes it's man-made. So this one was man-made, built on scaffolding in the middle of the Giants San Francisco Stadium. And we practiced in the morning when it was a little cooler, there was less sun on the snow, and then we compete in the afternoon. And by the time the afternoon sun had hit, there was quite a lot of snow that melted on the landing, which means the landing really narrowed. And when I performed my trick, a 540, which is 1.5 rotations, and landed backwards, I landed just sometimes we travel in the air, meaning where you take off, you either travel left or right, maybe a few feet to the left or right through the air onto the landing. So I traveled in the air, and when I landed, I was right on the edge of that snow, that landing. And there were 2x4s nailed in along the sides of the landing on the edges for the snow crew to walk up and down. And so I hope I'm giving you all a good visual, but I basically ran out of snow, found myself on these 2x4s that were nailed in, and just started sliding down those stairs at like max speed. I don't know, 40 miles an hour or something, and but was unable to catch anything. There was nothing for me to hold on to. And so it was just building this momentum, like down the steps. And then finally I caught an edge. Like I finally caught the step, and it broke my momentum, and I just hit the ground like a brick wall, probably again at like 40 miles an hour. And so the impact was extreme. And I ended up severing my pancreas in half. It was such a strong impact that it sliced right in half over my spine. And I was still fully conscious. So, no concussion, I don't think, or maybe concussion, but not. I just remember going through it all and people rushing around me. And then really soon after, I started coughing blood. So they knew it was really serious, right? They know it's serious when it's an internal injury and you're coughing blood. So rush to the hospital, ICU, emergency surgery, da 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 da. It's a pretty rough go.
And this is all at 18. This is your first attempt after signing the pro contract. So at the time, you're thinking, here we go. This is the first event. I'm going to show my stuff. Everybody's watching you. And this is how we start. Right, once you're laying there, Kyle, what are the first thoughts that are going through your head? What are the first things you're thinking about as you're throwing up blood and you're just trying to figure out what's going on? What goes through your mind first?
It's funny. I think my first thought was like, oh man, I was so close to landing that trick. Like I could have done that because I'm so competitive and I hate to fall or I hate to, uh, get something wrong. That's the perfectionist in me, I think. But then, I'm coughing blood and I know it's serious. I don't know too much about medicine, but I know that that's a big deal. So I just remember thinking, darn, I've hurt myself, and not long after, pretty quickly after, I'm just like, okay, like what do I need to get done to get back on the snow? Like
Wow.
let's deal with this and get this over with, and when can I get back on snow?
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty high level mindset. Just is that something that you've always had, Kai? It's like, hey, whatever happens, it's fine. Let's just deal with it and let's move forward. What do we got to do now? Or do you find yourself in that mode often? Or is it, hey, that's something I had to learn and teach myself? I think most of us would sit there or we'd be in the hospital. We start asking, why me? We get in that victim mentality and things would start to slow down and pause for us. But it seems like for you, in the instant moment, a couple moments later, you're thinking, okay, let's roll. What do we got to do? What's next? Is that something that you had to learn or is that something that kind of came naturally? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it really goes back to building that resilience really early on. I would attempt things, like jumping over a park bench. I gave an example. Sometimes I would fall, I would trip, and obviously I didn't, have an internal injury from that, but I learned that, okay, I fall and I can get back up and do it again. And so it's something you learn and you build on. And so obviously this was a huge injury. There was a lot more on the line and the consequences were high, but I knew, deep down that injuries are part of the road and this is a blip in my in my journey. And I also was so tethered to my vision and so tethered to my purpose that getting back out there, and doing whatever it took to do so wasn't even in question.
So there was never a moment of, do I want to go back out and do this again? That was really severe. It was, hey, what do we got to do? Let's move forward. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes me sound crazy, but that's, I guess, maybe part of the wild in me and part of the just the very stubborn. I'm a Taurus and I'm stubborn and I just that I hadn't even gotten started by that point, DJ. I just signed my first contract and there was just so much more I want to do. I do a lot of visualization as well. And it was like, no, I haven't even had a chance to do a percent of what I wanted to get done out there. So there's no chance I'm stopping now. I have to make it back.
So let's pick the story up a little bit. So you were back in the hospital. I'm sure there were surges and things that we had to do. Walk me through what were kind of those first few weeks or few months.
Well, it was pretty tough at first. I woke up a week later. I'd been sedated, not in a coma, but just really drugged up. And I woke up with a feeding tube and machines beeping all around me. I was in the ICU. So it was pretty tough first week. I'm pretty sure the doctors, my mom only told me this last year, and this like happened almost 20 years ago, which is crazy, but the doctors couldn't guarantee that night that I was going to make it. Which is wild.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a hard hit. It was a hard hit. I don't recommend anybody out there slice their pancreas in half. It's an important internal organ. Don't mess with that one. But I got through the surgery. First week was tough. Second week, I was more alert, more awake, but still, like I could barely walk. I was in rough shape. By the time I stabilized 2 weeks later, they sent me back home to Montreal. That's where I was born and raised, and that's where I continued rehab. which was touch and go because I ended up having an infection in my incision and going back in the hospital. I mean, it was as bad as it could get. It was, it got. And it was about 9 months of rehab, meaning I lost a lot of weight. It's an organ that deals with your digestion. So it just really messed with my system. There was a lot I had to learn in terms of nutrition and a lot I had to learn in terms of physique and getting back to a physical capacity when I could ski again. So it was rough, but those things I just highlighted, the nutrition piece, the physical aspect, those are things I wouldn't have necessarily learned until I was really confronted with it. So, there's always a positive spin, not to sugarcoat it because it was hard. Um, and there was some positive that came with it. I learned a lot.
So 9 months working through it. What happened after that?
Well, I wish I could say I got back on snow and my career took off then. However, I got back on snow and about 2 weeks in, I was in New Zealand and I'm riding pretty high, feeling pretty good. Had done a lot of visualization during my downtime, and then I blew my knee. I tore my ACL for the first time. So essentially, the first 2 years of my career, I don't even know if I talked about that in the podcast. It's just like it's just loads and loads. But first 2 years of my career were on the sidelines. So I blew my knee, took another, I don't know, 7, 8 months of rehab, learned a lot more about rehab and conditioning. And then that's when I came back to start my little domination, if you will.
Holy cow. I want to dive in. I think one of the mistakes some people make sometimes when they try to study great like yourself and some of the goats out there is they want to study them when they're at their best. And sometimes a mistake I think people make is what you need to do is if you want to study these people like yourself, you need to study what was it like before they got to the great moment. You need to study what did they do during their adversity? How did they make it their advantage? How did they make the misery a masterpiece? That's what makes them great. So it'd be easy to be like, hey, what was life like when you were on these podiums? We can do that. But I want to dive even deeper and learn some of the things about like what made you so great early on. So for 2 years, you're sidelined. It's not like, hey, I'm just waiting my turn or I'm sick or something. It's like, no, man, I'm really injured, like severely injured, waiting for my turn, and things are happening that are out of my control. What was the greatest lesson that you learned having to sit on the sidelines, not knowing what the future was going to hold at 18, 19, and 20 years old? As you look back now, Kyle, what's the biggest lesson that you take from those moments? That's tough.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, DJ. It's so easy to focus on the high times and to try to understand and study that. And I think there's value in that. But like I mentioned earlier, anybody who's been quote unquote great at what they've done, they've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. And so, how do we get through that and how do we persevere so that we can, get to that light at the end of the tunnel and give ourselves the opportunity to continue to build our capacities and get to that greatness. I've seen a lot of people unfortunately give up, in the midst of those trials because they didn't have that vision. I think they weren't tethered to the purpose. And so for me, I think if I break it down, there's a few components. One, I knew I had to be really intentional about the quality of my thoughts when I was going through the day to day. So yes, I could focus on, everybody's out there, competing, training, learning, having a good time, and I'm here in bed. Yes, I can barely walk. I'm learning, the steps of heel to toe to learn to walk again.
Wow.
And that all of that sucks, and I acknowledge that, but I also knew I had to focus on what I could do, not about what I couldn't do. And you end up being able to, when you get creative, like there's a lot you can still get done when you're lying in bed, doing rehab. I did so much visualization work, for example. I've always been a huge proponent for that stuff. It really works. I've I've had injuries where I've been on the sidelines for 6, 7, 8 months, and I come back feeling sharper and stronger and just more on point. And I attribute that 100% to my visualization work. So Yeah, being really intentional about how you use your time and where you spend your thoughts. Are you in in the victim thing, like I wish this hadn't happened, which like yeah, you got to acknowledge the hardships and acknowledge it sucks. If not, you're just not acknowledging reality. But then you have to find that next best thing. What can I do about it? What's in my control? My thoughts, what actions can I take? What effort can I put into that? So intentionality. Then there's also, I mentioned earlier, like purpose and having a clear vision of where I want to go. And that's something we talk a lot at Finding Mastery. Dr. Mike talks a lot about it, is being tethered to this purpose, whether it's, wanting to be an Olympic athlete or just like, I don't know, being a great mom, being a great dad, whatever it is, just being so clear on the why you're doing something and being clear on where you want to go with that. That's the vision piece. And, that's what keeps you moving forward. That's the motor. So when things are tough, when you're wading through that deep, difficult mud, you still are able to persevere, to push through. That's the resilience piece. So I was clear. I was clear on why I was doing it.
So just talking about the purpose, and does that something that came naturally, or did somebody help you with that? And how did you get so, like, to use your words, tethered? How did you get so tight with your vision?
It's a good question. I think I was born with a very strong will, and I have always felt really, really grateful for my young self, the little Kaya who just had big dreams. I had big dreams, and I was lucky to be surrounded by people who didn't bring them down, or who didn't put me down and say, "Oh, that's never going to happen." Some people thought I was a little wild and like, yeah, okay, whatever, but I was like that kid at the dinner table when I was 6 or 7 saying, if the Olympics were on, I said, one day I'm gonna go to the Olympics. I'm gonna be an Olympian. And my parents were like, cool, go for it. Like let's how can we help you? So I was really lucky to have those kinds of ideas pop in my mind and then have them be supported. And then that's, I think, how I learned to dream and develop the dream. And then the better and better I got in my sport of rollerblading before I transferred to skiing, the more I built my confidence and learned, wow, you know what? If I put my mind to something and if I train hard, I can be pretty good at this. Like I'm learning quickly and I'm having a lot of fun. The fun piece is important. I was able to keep that love and grow that and that way my dream just kept growing bigger and bigger and my belief in what I could accomplish grew to, I mean, to the Olympic level, if you will. And so that became my anchor. And then later on I met Dr. Mike about midway through my career, so he asked if I had assistance. So about midway was a great time to meet him. I'd had success already. I'd already utilized a lot of mindset skills on my own. But with Mike, I learned a lot of the science around it, how to practice it and really reinforce it. And that came at a good time when I'd gone through quite a lot of injury by then. And so that helps too, right? Going through those tough times is being tethered to that purpose and that vision so you can get through those injuries.
Yeah, I think I love the idea. When I start with athletes too, I always start with what is your mission and getting them to define that, especially at an early age. I don't think there's too early to get in touch with what your mission is, and that's what's going to drive you through the hard times. I'm curious, Kyle, what's the advice that you would give to a 14 to 18-year-old athlete who wants to discover what their mission is, or they want to have a mission statement, or they want to have something that they can kind of create some foundation around so they can have that mindset that you got to get to? What's the advice? How do they do it? What are the first steps? Can we kind of walk through that, if that's truly kind of the first staple in creating this kind of winner's mentality, if that's where we want to go? How do we do that? What does that look like?
That's a great question, DJ. I think the first step is to just give yourself permission to dream. I think we all I think we're all born with this. with a free mind and an open mind, and it's through our experiences and through our environments and the people around us that we learn, what we think we can do or what we can't do. And so the first step is to just give yourself permission to explore the possibilities. What are the things, explore them openly and honestly. What are the things that make me feel alive? What are the things that make me feel energized? What what's meaningful to me? What gives me fulfillment? And I think if you explore long enough, I mean, some people are lucky to find it early, and some people it takes a little more exploration. But I think if you're honest and you're open enough, you're gonna have ideas come into your mind. You're gonna identify the things that matter to you, and if you can then hone in on those things and get clear on why they're important to you, what are your values? What are the things that you want to bring to the table? How can you make an impact for others through what you're doing? That really then starts to solidify what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're going to do it. So, yeah, that's I guess I would start there.
Yeah, and I think it's a great place for people to start too, because and oftentimes we don't really, if we're not intentional about that process, Kyle, we could get into our 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s before we really start to think about it. So creating some self-awareness about what is important to you, what is your mission. Maybe start with the end in mind is a strategy I like to use. Like, when life is over, whenever that is, how do you want people to remember you? What's the mission? What do you want people to say about you when you're not around? And that can kind of create the steps to what's important to you. And then from that, the better you get to know yourself that way, not only is it easier to make decisions, but I think it's also easier to battle through the tough times because you have a better relationship with who you are. To me, that's the inner game. That's how we build the mindset is starting within. It's not looking at what did Michael Jordan do or what did Tiger Woods. It's not looking that way. It's starting within first.
Yeah, I think that awareness piece is so key, and being able to look internally and explore, right? And being able to sit with yourself and truly be honest with the things that are most important to you. And I think from that grows, that's where you start to, begin to imagine yourself and build a vision. And when we talk about vision, I think one of the key things is to just be bold about it. Don't, I would encourage you to I would encourage everybody to really think outside of the box, take it to what you think is just a little past possible, and be bold about the vision, because anybody who's ever broken records, who have made history, it was impossible before that moment, right? It was never done before that moment. And so, you know, I went to a Jay-Z concert once, and I don't know, he said, like, he told people, be unrealistic. And that stuck with me. Be unrealistic. Yes. Don't be delusional, but take yourself to that extreme level, and then and imagine it and live it in your head. The science, there's a lot of science about visualization and reinforcing pathways. The more that you think about something, if you can see it in your mind and you can believe it in your mind, you're opening up, the possibility for that reality. And so be bold, be unrealistic, and then once you've locked in that vision, then you start to back out and say, okay, what are the steps that I need to do to get there?
Great advice, not only for the young athlete, for everybody listening. We're never too old to dream big. We're never too old to have that goal. Because that's what some people will say, right? It's like, oh man, I wish I would have. No, if you're still alive, breathing, and listening to this, you still have an opportunity to do some of those things. Awesome. Kai, this is great. So a couple of the skills you said, intentional quality of thoughts, visualization work, and then have a purpose and clear vision of where you want to go. You've mentioned the importance of visualization work a couple times. I would love to double click on that and just hear about what were some of the strategies you did as an athlete? What did visualization look like? What were some of the things you would see? Would you see yourself succeeding? Would you see yourself failing? What did that look like? And how can my listeners and athletes use that and put that in their practice too?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back around because I really think that was one of my greatest tools. One of my greatest mindset skills was to be able to visualize and to train my tricks in my mind. There's so much risk in my sport. We're flying over 80 feet sometimes backwards, right? 40 miles an hour. So if you can practice a trick in your head, it's a whole lot safer than doing it in real life on snow. And so I got to a point I mean, I learned very early on that it's not that I needed to visualize, it's just that I had a desire to visualize because I was so obsessed with what I was doing that, what I was thinking about was creating, like I kind of mentioned earlier, is like creating that reality, making it possible. I'm practicing in my mind, I'm building these pathways out. And so essentially I'm practicing the trick and making it much more possible for me to do it in the physical realm, if you will. And um, it just I never tried a trick. I never tried a big, consequential, risky trick without being fully able to visualize it in my mind. And when I say visualize, my process, some people do it in the third person where they close their eyes and they see themselves doing it. I For me, what was most effective was closing my eyes and being able to do it in the first person, to feel to feel the trick, to feel the rotation, to be able to spot what am I going to see in the air, how am I going to be feeling, maybe what am I going to be hearing? People have different cues and different tips, or yeah, different cues, I'd say. For me, it was really visual and spatial. And what I knew that when I could visualize it and feel it in myself, then I could perform the trick. That's when I had the trust in myself to go for it. And so when I was competing, for example, the way I'd use visualization is the night before I would do the run from top to bottom in my mind. And when I say top to bottom, I competed in slope style. And so that's, if you've seen a snow park, it's a set of rail features and jump features, very similar to what you see in the snow park. And best run counts. It's judged on creativity, difficulty, technicality. It's not a timed run. And so I would visualize feature number one, feature number two, three, four, five, and get all the way to the end. And I'd have to land the whole run in my mind and then do it a second time over to then be done my work, to be able to go to bed, to compete the next day. If I fell in the run, because sometimes you can't imagine it. Sometimes it does go wrong, which is not a failure in the visualization. It actually teaches you, okay, if that happens, how do I
Mm.
correct it? So, so I don't, I hope people hear that even if you can't visualize it, you got to keep trying and get through that block. So then you've actually then reinforced yourself. You've just gotten better at the trick, I guess. So anyway, do the run twice in my mind, go to bed, and then in the start gate, I would visualize it once as well before dropping in for my run. And then I'd also imagine like the feeling of like the crowd and how it would feel when I landed my run. And I mean, all the feelings associated with the whole aspect, the run itself, and then hopefully landing it and killing it.
And what do you
Yeah.
think the result was of that guy? Was it confidence? Was it another like what do you think it helped you with so much?
Oh, my hand is it visualization allowed me, I probably spent, no joke, half of my career on the sidelines. And visualization is what allowed me to stay on the top of my game and on the top of the game for a significant amount of time, uh, regardless of the fact that I was on the sidelines. It kept me practicing, it kept me on the hill, doing my tricks, learning new tricks. It just was in a different form. I really attribute so much of my success in sport to visualization.
Oh, that's so cool. I like the idea of like mental reps, right? So I work with a lot of football teams, and sometimes in football, we can only get a certain amount of reps because it's hard on the body. We have a lot of guys, practice is limited. And so what we try to do is tap
Exactly.
into mental reps. So even if we're not in the game, if we're not in practice, we can watch somebody do something and then we can close our eyes and visualize ourselves doing it. And now I'm getting double the reps. Geno Smith was
That's
talking
right.
about this with Michael Gervais, talking about stealing reps. And so he's on the sidelines, backup quarterback. He's watching Russ where he wants to be, but he's not getting the game time reps. And so instead of complaining about it, he's visualizing himself every single play. And he quote unquote, like tongue in cheek, said, I'm stealing reps from Russ because he's like, what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of every single opportunity. So I think it's a great teaching point for student athletes of any level to know that the if you're not doing mental reps, you're leaving reps on the table. And as an athlete, you need as many reps as possible. And whether you're in it or not in it, if you're not experiencing it physically or not, sometimes your mind doesn't know the difference. So you might as well get as many reps as you can.
Yeah, spot on, DJ, exactly. And I love that stealing the reps. I wrote that down because that's a good that's a funny way of putting it. But absolutely, you can practice on and off, the field or the hill, whatever the sport is. You can really, if you're intentional about what you're doing and how you're utilizing your time and your energy, you can really yeah, like you said, get double the amount of reps without having to put in that physical work and risk.
I want to take me inside Kaya's mind when you're moments before the race beginning. And I don't know a ton about your sport. So talk to me like I'm a 4-year-old trying to figure this out. I'm humbly trying to learn. What were the thoughts going through your mind before it's time to go? I don't know if it's a start gate or a gun, whatever it is. Just walk me through the 30 to 45 seconds beforehand. What's going through your mind? What are you trying to think about? What are you not trying to think about? Did you have a routine? Walk me through that moment. I'm so curious.
Yeah, 30 to 45 seconds pre-drop. The activation's really high, meaning my heart's racing. Um, I'm trying to think clearly for sure. There's a lot going on. Athletes are pacing back and forth in the start gate, waiting for their turn. We've been practicing on course. By then, by the time I'm about to do my first run in a finals competition, let's say, ideally I've done my run a few times and I successfully landed it. And so if that's the case, then I'm feeling pretty good in the start gate and I'm waiting for my turn with confidence. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way though, and practice goes pretty poorly. And that happens to the best of us. We don't have a good training day or a good day at work, good day in whatever in life. And we still need to gather ourselves and try to reset to, bring our best foot forward. And so in those moments, I would, you know, going back to that awareness piece, is I would recognize like my thought pattern wasn't where I wanted it to be. I was, focusing on the things outside of my control, what the other competitors are doing, the expectations, how training went. And I'd catch myself and then I'd turn it around and go, okay, what is in my control? The way I'm talking to myself. We know that confidence comes from, past successes is part of it, but it comes from the way that you talk to yourself. And and if you're talking to yourself and you're saying, I can't do this, I don't think I can pull it off, well, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you're like, okay, I've got this, and you can back it up with, because I've done this before, because last time I failed, but I learned from XYZ, um, you know, you got to pivot. You got to recognize if you're in a negative state of mind and flip that around to positive and go, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I can do this. And so there's a lot of mental game in those 30 to 45 seconds when you're waiting. It feels like an eternity. Uh, when I'm staring down at the course, about to drop, I'm looking down at all those features and I'm pretty hawk-eyed. I feel like the hawk is my spirit animal, actually. And I'm just looking down and really, really, really honed in on, exactly what I need to do on that first feature. I wrote on my sleeve one step at a time. And so that was my way of reminding myself before I dropped in and then throughout the course is like one feature at a time, one moment at a time. Because when we think ahead and we get ahead of ourselves, that's often when we trip up. And that's not just in sport, that's in anything. And so when you can be as absolutely present in the moment, in your body, in your mind as possible, that gives you the best chance of success because you're in full control of your body and your mind. You're there, you're in it. You're feeling the carve of your skis and the weight and the momentum. You're feeling everything in the moment. And so it was just about hyper focus, having positive self-talk and and also lastly, looking at the course as not a threat, because it can be scary and there's quote unquote a lot on the line. I wanted to do well, a lot of people expecting me to do well, but instead of that being a threat, I reframed it as this opportunity. Here's this
Oh, that's
opportunity
cool.
for me to I've been training for thousands of hours,
Mm.
and here's my opportunity to show them what I've got and what I've been working on. So let's effing go.
Mm. That's cool. I want to let's put that on pause because I want to come back to the threat versus opportunity. That's really cool. I haven't heard that before. I recently heard this research study. I want to go back to the 30 to 45 seconds beforehand, real quick. There's a research study that just came out from Harvard, and this teacher brought in her students, and she said, "Hey, guess what? Today you guys are going to be singing Journey's 'Don't Stop Believing' in front of the class." And then she said, "All right, so here's what we're gonna do." And I also brought in this software recognition machine that's gonna it's gonna measure your rhythm, your pitch, and your overall score of how you. Do you know this story?
No, I don't. I
Okay,
don't.
so she brings
No,
in
please.
this karaoke machine, divides the class into two. In one room, she goes into the class and says, "Hey, from now until the time when it's your turn to come up and speak or sing, I need you to repeatedly say out loud, 'I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous.'" You're going to repeatedly say that. Okay, sounds good. Good. It goes to the other room. You guys, I want you to repeatedly say, 'I'm so excited. I'm so excited,' before you come out to the class and you sing. And you're nodding because you probably knows where this goes.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
the group that was self-reported so excited scored 81% better than the
Wow.
self-reported I'm so nervous. And the
Right,
only difference was one word. And so
right.
I would love to hear if there was a reframe for you. You talked about how in that pre-race there were some times where I had to change my thoughts from going from here to here. Was that one of them? Is it I'm nervous, I'm so excited, or was it something a little bit more personal? Was it something else? I think it'd be great to hear how you went from one side to the other so then my listeners can understand, "Oh, that's how she went from there to there."
Wow. Well, first of all, that's such a cool
Yeah.
study that you
Yeah.
just outlined. I would love to look more into that. And 81%, that is so powerful and just one word. So that really speaks to the power of the way you speak to yourself, right? And that's where
That's right.
that confidence comes from. I love that. It's I, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate it. I just, you know, when there's Kaya who's ready to rock to drop in and light it up. Um, my nickname in the start gate was Kaya Faya, so let's call her Kaya Faya. When she was on, like, the world's her oyster. Excuse the cliche, but like the world is hers. And when she was off somewhere else thinking about all the what ifs and what could happen, what has happened in the past, what's everyone doing, what's everyone expecting of me, what if I don't win this, I'm the defending gold medalist, blah blah blah. I mean, the list goes on. um, that Kaya is not going to do a good job when she drops in for her run. And I've been both Kayas, I've experienced both, and I know that I want to be Kaya Faya when I'm in the start gate. So it was, it's not like this came right away. I learned this. Like, learning to compete is also a skill, learning to handle yourself and remain, at the right level of intensity of activation is a skill, and learning to catch your thoughts and the way you're speaking to yourself is a skill. This is all stuff that you practice. And so the more I competed, the more I kind of understood, okay, to question myself, where am I at? What frame of mind am I? Who am I embodying right now? Is it the scared Kaya or is it Kaya Faya? And so if it wasn't Kaya Faya, it was like, okay, how do I get there? What do I need to do? Do I need to take some deep breaths to bring my activation down? Do I need to reframe, look at this course as an opportunity? I mean, there's all these different mental skills that you can apply. And the more that you practice them, the more that you can bring yourself into that ideal state or ideal frame of mind.
Talk to me about that. Let's go back to that opportunity and threat. That's a to me that's a mastery level reframe. How can we make that a little bit more simplified or easy to digest for even high school or college athletes? What does that look like to make things as a opportunity versus a threat?
Yeah, it's honestly, I remember this session when Dr. Mike, we were talking about, I don't remember specifically what the trick was, but I was talking about how I'm really scared to try it. I'm scared to go for it. And he asked me simply, what if you could view this as an opportunity rather than a threat? It's like, first it didn't really, I was like, what do you mean? Like, how do you just shift? But the next time I was in the start gate and I was feeling really threatened. It was actually at the X Games, and I was sitting in third position, I believe, but I really wanted the gold medal. And I had learned this new trick, the switch 1080, which is going backwards, 3 foot rotation, and hadn't been done in competition, in women's competition. And I remember, feeling agitated. I hadn't had, very solid first 2 runs, sitting in third place, but I wanted that gold medal. And I just didn't feel like I was bringing my A game. And so but I was scared. I could tell like that's why I had bobbled in those first 2 runs. I'll answer your question to how it can apply to others, but I just want to tell you how it showed up in my life. Um, and so I just knew I wasn't on top of it, and it was because of fear. And so when I realized that, like the threat piece, I heard Dr. Mike in my head, and I was like, what if I can make this an opportunity? This is my opportunity now to show everybody this is the X Games pinnacle event in the freestyle world. This is my opportunity to show them that switch 1080 that no one's ever done. I've landed it once before. Like this is if there's a place to try it, it's here. Like the X Games motto is go big or go home. And so I was like, this is my opportunity to shine. This is not a threat. This is like my opportunity to shine. And it was as simple as that. It was like a quick reframe. And that's where I stepped into Kaya Faya, where I was looking down at the features and I was like, I was in attack mode. I was like, let's go mode. And so that's how it showed up in my life. The way that I would say you can apply it is literally in any situation that feels scary to you, but that is, that's gonna, I mean, I'm not saying to lean into risk. Like I don't want people to to put themselves in danger, but so many things that we do on a day-to-day basis that are hard, um, are for our benefit. If we can get through them and we work through them, we'll get better. That's how we grow as athletes. That's how we grow as anything is we push our comfort zones. And so one of the ways that you can learn to trust yourself a little more is to do hard things every day. So if you're doing a presentation at school, like and I'm talking if you're an athlete and you want to be great in football, but you have an oral presentation in English class, you can use that as training to be like, you know what? This makes me really nervous. I'm scared to stand up in front of everybody, which by the way, everybody feels like scary to do public speaking. Like, and instead of like using this as like looking at this with fear, why don't I see like how I can show up? Like, let me play around with my mind a little bit. Let me see like how fully I can show up and rock this speech. Or like, wow, I'm about to have a really difficult conversation with my partner or my dad or my mom, whatever. Like, okay, let me see if I can use this like as an opportunity to get closer to this person. So there's always a way to reframe stress. physiologically we've been taught like to avoid stress and that stress is bad. Stress is actually a good thing. It helps you show up for the moment. If your heart's beating, if your focus is narrowing, it means you care. It means that you're invested in this and you want a positive outcome. So it's not a negative thing. It just means you're turning on. So if you can switch that and reframe that and be like, cool, my body's showing up for me. Like I'm ready to, like I'm going to use this fuel. This is my opportunity. You can absolutely apply that to basically anything in life.
Fantastic. Opportunity is such a great word. Kai, when you were an athlete, what was your relationship like with failure?
Well, no one likes to fail, but I I didn't see it as it was never my defining moment. Failure was never the end of the line for me because I really believed I had so much more in the tank. And so I saw failure as just a bump in the road, or a fork in the road. You always end up coming back on track if you stay again tethered to your vision and your purpose, and you put in that day-to-day work. You're going to come back on track. It's just yeah, it's just part of the road. That's it.
Good. It's not the end of the road. It's just a bend in the road. Another word that you said that I really liked was the word activated. I wrote that down. You said when I'm in the gates, if you will, I just felt like activation was going on, you said. So I think there's this, and words are very important. I mean, one of the things you said was be intentional about the quality of your thoughts, be intentional about the quality of your words here if we're talking about self-talk. I think when it comes to trust and kind of that pre-game process, it's important to be calm. I think finding the balance between calm and activated simultaneously. So, how do you go about this dichotomy of calm and activated as a high performer? And how can my listeners understand the difference, but also work together with both of them?
Yeah, that's a great question, DJ. I think often we imagine that, the calmer we are, the better we show up. That that when we're stressed out, quote unquote stressed out, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, that our body's activated, that we just want to get rid of that feeling as much as possible.
Right.
And I think people who are great and show up and do their best, they have a level of activation that's not really Zen-like and kind of like lackluster. Like you need a certain intensity
Hmm.
to step into the moment in whatever you're doing. So there's actually this really cool chart. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson model, made in 1908, if anyone wants to Google that. And it's like an inverted U. It's the relationship between activation and performance. And so it shows when you're in like a lower activation 1 to 3 range, which is like really just like you're really chill, you're just kind of dragging your feet. Like that's not when performance is high. Performance is highest when you're in like that 4, 5, 6 range, when you're pretty turned on, you're calm, meaning like you're still focused, you have a clear mind, but but you're turned on, you're activated, you're buzzing, there's energy coursing through your body. And then when you get to that higher end of activation, that's 7, 8, 9, 10, we've all been there where it's just like our heart feels like it's beating out of our chest. We can't think straight. Our limbs are really, really heavy. And so we want to avoid that overactivation and be able to bring ourselves down into that mid range of like calm intensity, which is again like having energy coursing through you, but having that clarity of mind.
That's so awesome. I think even just using the word activated, to me, activated gives more of like a just a general positive sense versus nervous or versus scared. I mean, just the word activated, turned on. I like just the reframe of the words, kind of like nervous versus excited. Even one word can make a difference. So I think just taking the word activated into your vernacular could be a big difference for athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no negative or positive. It's
Mhm.
just a neutral word, right? And like language matters, the way that we speak to ourselves as well as the way that we view other things positively or negatively, that has a big impact in the way that we approach them. So but yeah, activation. It's a good thing. Can
Okay,
be a
one more
great thing.
Okay, one more topic I want to get into is its identity. I think this is something that you've been working through, talking about. What have you learned? We'll go broad strokes first, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper. But Kai, what have you learned about identity as a high performer, identity now as not a high performer on the slopes, obviously a high performer in other areas of life. But what have you learned about the identity of an athlete being at the very, very top of a sport?
Oh man, identity was a tricky one for me. I have certainly learned a lot in my 36 years. I, grew up being a pretty great athlete or good athlete. And then I had a lot of success both in rollerblading and then skiing, certainly at the, first half or two-thirds of my career. And so I really identified as a good athlete. That's what I was known for. That's what was celebrated of me. And that's what I think people gave me a lot of attention and love for. And that feels great. That's all good, right? When things are going well and you're bringing home the medals. And then when you don't, when you start to wind down or when you retire, and all of a sudden you're not that athlete anymore. That's not your day to day, or that's completely gone. It can really shake up your idea of identity, and it certainly did mine. I went through a pretty hard injury, which kind of I held on for a long time. I held on for a long time. It wasn't instantaneous where I had to completely drop out of the sport, but I was having a really hard time maintaining the level I wanted to because of head injury. And so eventually I had to retire, and I went through a really big identity crisis. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. There was a retirement piece, and then there was also going to the Olympics and it not going the way that I had hoped it would go, going in as the gold medal favorite, Canada's, slopestyle queen, blah, 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 which is all nice. But I didn't succeed. I had a really rough go for several reasons, no excuses. And, you know, those things really rocked my identity, really rocked my sense of self. And that's something I had to wrestle with when I went through it, is like, who am I and what is my value on this earth? What is my value as a human being, if not to show the world what female athletes can do, and to push the limits and to inspire others? Like, who am I, and what is my value if I don't have that? And that was a good, couple year journey for me where I really had to dig deep, and at, at first I just stopped introducing myself as a skier whatsoever. I needed to understand that people liked me and wanted to be around me just for me, not for what I'd accomplished. And and then I slowly started to understand, okay, like I was great at the things that I did because of the qualities that I have within me. And you know, I it's all in me. Those are the qualities that I can bring to any and all aspects of my life and my relationships, my home life, my work life, my hobbies. Um, Kaya Faya exists in all aspects, and it wasn't skiing that made me valuable and made me great. It was, me that made that happen. Am I making sense? Am
Yeah,
I articulating that?
yeah, it's a tough topic. I remember a quote that you said about it was that I used to think winning made me valuable. Now I know my value comes from what I am, not what I achieve. I think that's a deep quote. I mean that is something I think that everybody needs to hear. So I'll say it again. I used to think winning made me valuable. Now I know my value comes from what I am, not what I achieve.
Absolutely. That's something I think we all need to learn at some point or another in this day and age in our society. We put so much value on what we earn and how we live, where we live, what we wear, what we drive, and society and everything outside of us is defining what success means. And so that can be a major trap when you don't fit that mold, or you don't, either you don't want to or you can't, and you haven't decided it for yourself. It's a slippery slope, and it could end in what happened to me, an identity crisis, because we all, to some extent, identify with what we do. And so, if we can flip that narrative around and realize that we're bringing ourselves to the table, and that's the value, and not, what we achieve. It's how we achieve it. It's who we're bringing to the table. That's the value.
Yeah, it's almost
That's
like you're flipping this. It's like it's almost like how you're saying I want to bring my identity into my sport, not take
mhm.
my identity from sport into my personal life. It's kind of like a total reframe that way. Is that you with me on that?
Exactly, exactly. It's flipping it on its head. Exactly. I'm going to bring my greatness into everything that I do. And it's not the greatness defined by the things that I do. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's flipped.
Very cool. I want to close down with what's called what I call the $1 million question, Kai. The $1 million question
Oh
looks like
la
this.
la. Do I
What do
get a
you
million dollars
Yeah, you
or?
should. It'll be sent. It'll be a check in the mail here right after we're done.
Okay.
What do you know now that you wish you knew at 18 or let's say 14 or 16 when you first got into the sport? What do you know now that you wish you knew back then? And I like to take off the table. There's nothing I wouldn't tell myself. I need to experience everything. That's great. I love the no regrets life. But what's a piece of advice that you would give your younger self? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were 18?
Well, first of all, DJ, since there's $1 million on the line, I feel highly activated. So let me take a few
Activated,
deep breaths
yes.
right now and get myself down to my
Sure.
my optimal range. All right, I got a couple things.
All right.
One is what we just talked about, the identity piece. If I could talk to my 18-year-old self, because there was a lot of suffering through this, the identity crisis, and figuring out why I mattered on this earth. So if I could go back and tell her, I would say, your worth is not based on your success. It is not based on the things that you achieve. And that's hugely important. And I would also say, because I kind of briefly mentioned earlier that I pushed on pretty long after having had this head injury, and just because I was stubborn, I didn't want to let go. And I think I really hurt myself in doing that. I didn't let go, you know, it is what it is. I don't want to say I didn't let go early enough, but I think I did more damage because I didn't listen to my body, and I didn't listen to the pain I had in my head. And that is something I would tell my 18-year-old self. And I think that actually ties right back to identity, as I did not know how to let go of being Kaya the athlete. And so I held on so darn tight. And if I'd just known that it didn't all depend on my success, my worth, that I could let go a little sooner, I think I'd be healthier off today.
Hmm. Powerful words. Kaya, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah.
How can my listeners best support you?
Hey, well, thanks so much for having me, DJ. This has been a great conversation. Hope you'll have me on again sometime.
Awesome. Absolutely.
I think we could we could
Oh
go
my
on for
gosh.
days. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm on a journey right now. I'm a mindset coach with Finding Mastery. You could check out my Instagram and follow my journey. It's just at Kaya, simple handle. And then check out Finding Mastery. We've got a really cool podcast. Dr. Mike was my sports psychologist at the time I was an athlete. I learned everything from him, and now I get to use the same model that we worked on together, and help others learn from that and share my experiences. So, follow Finding Mastery, sign up for a course if you want. I think like this stuff has been life changing for me, and you can follow us in that way. It's a really cool podcast as well. It's you and DJ and Finding Master are in contention here, but yeah, just I don't know, follow the journey. I'm coaching as well. Um, yeah, follow along.
Awesome. Kaya, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much, DJ.